My name is Rebecca Graham. I was born and live on Paramount land, the traditional owners of the beautiful land here. And I have been working in healthcare for almost 40 years. And I have worked predominantly within South Australia in the public health system. I've worked for many years in mental health services, which was thoroughly enjoyable. I also have worked in association with country services for at least 13 years, which has been the very best part of my career. And I'm one of those people that is very privileged to be able to say that every job I've ever had has led me to where I am now in the current position that I am in.
Hello, I'm Tanya Lehman, and I'm an organisational change leadership coach and consultant. Prior to that, I spent 25 years working in the public health system, vast majority of that in South Australia, and all of it in rural areas. I grew up on a farm in a little place called Wagen in Western Australia on Noongar country, and have for the last 25 years lived in the Riverland of South Australia on the beautiful Murray River on the lands of the Irrawirrung people. I've had the great privilege of working with Barossa Fleurieu for officially for 4 years, but I've worked with Rebecca for well over a decade and many of the people in the system for even almost all of my 25 years in public health system.
When we became a new organisation in 2019, the 1st of July, we had a number of challenges as a new local health network. So we became a legal entity in our own right. And also at the same time of this governance reform program, the concept of governing boards were introduced. So some of the team were from an older structure and some of the team were new appointments coming from a variety of different places. And then, of course, we had barely got our feet under the table when we headed into the summer of 2019-2020. And for our patch, it was a devastating bushfire season. So naturally, within the number of health services, we operate 10 hospitals across our patch and a huge number of community services, along with mental health. We had to respond naturally to the events as they unfolded. And that was extremely traumatic for ourselves. And so barely had we stood down. In fact, we were still in emergency management mode and still had an incident management team meeting. We were then hit by COVID. And I think while some of those things galvanised us as a team, we also were observing significant levels of burnout over a longer period of time and significant levels of stress within our team. The one thing that I am so delighted with was the fact that we continued to invest in our culture and leadership program, because what that enabled us to do was really to be able to lean in very safely with trust and to be able to lean in with discomfort. And that had been really important to forge those really strong, necessary relationships as a leadership team, and to create that ripple effect, that positive ripple effect throughout our organisation.
Health is a really complex beast in the rural areas in particular, because it's not just healthcare, it's early childhood development, it's aged care, it's disability services, and then you throw in these really devastating and very significant bushfires, followed right hot on the heels of the bushfires, COVID. So we started really to say, what is the culture that that Barossa Hills Fleurieu wants to build? What is the good stuff now that we want to build on? What are the capabilities of the leadership team? And so there's some really, and what is the board? What does the board do? How does the board work with the leadership team? Some of those really formative conversations were a critical part of the initiating piece of work with this organisation. I had been working with the Leadership Circle profile for a few years, and so I knew how powerful it could be as an individual leadership development catalyst. And the collective leadership assessment, how useful that could be in helping a team of leaders see their collective impact. What was clear to me was, in order for this new entity to establish itself, common language was going to be really important to bring a diverse group of people together and form a team, but not just for the executive, also for the board. The Leadership Circle offered a tool that could help leaders to see what they needed to notice about the way they were showing up individually for themselves, but also how they're bouncing off their peers and their direct reports and the board, and to be able to have language to navigate through that, particularly when they're showing up in ways that were reactive to the incredibly challenging context they were operating in, and perhaps not the fullest expression of their leadership capability.
The idea of doing this as a collective, and that was to understand how we are seen by others becomes a really critical point as a collective. And so to be able to do that, and I love the Leadership Circle because it's simple and it's visual. So and having used it and had confidence with it over a period of time, it became a really great tool. So it was an important piece of work that gave us some real evidence about where we were as a team and an organisation, but more importantly, it fed into the other initiatives that we were doing. So it fed into the way that we were using our Growing Leaders program. It fed directly into our executive coaching for us as an executive together and individually. And it fed into some of the work that we were doing around deliberately developmental organisational teams.
You know, really at the core of the Leadership Circle is this idea that organisations don't transform, people do. We designed a program that had the Leadership Circle at the heart of it, but that had many components to it. And so we had the collective leadership assessment that we did in October 2019 and again in November 2022. Once we conducted the collective leadership assessment, then every executive member did their own Leadership Circle profile. And as there was a little bit of turnover in the executive over that 3-year period, anyone new to the team was offered the profile and did the profile. And so there was a continuous investment in ensuring that everyone in the leadership team had been profiled. Had all of the executive and then 42 senior managers, so many of the direct reports of the executive team also had a Leadership Circle profile in 2019-2020, and then we added another 15 the following year. So a huge investment in Leadership Circle profiles at the executive and senior manager and even some team leader level across the organisation in that period. And the power of that in terms of the volume of feedback that people received about their leadership and how they were perceived and where their opportunities for growth, the quality and quantity of coaching that they received, not only from myself, but a team of consultants that came together and worked together with Rebecca and her teams. The Leadership Circle and this simple concept of how are we showing up? Is it in our reactive selves where we're constrained and restricted in our effectiveness, or is it in our more creative expressions of our leadership? But the collective leadership assessment was particularly powerful to give that before and after that kind of initial establishment phase of the organisation. There's so many leadership development tools out there, and one of the things that I did as I was growing in my practice in organisational development and leadership coaching was to do kind of some deep dives into a whole range of the options out there. When I was doing that, the big decision for me around Leadership Circle was it doesn't tell you this is the ideal leader and you've all got to be the same. What it allows for is the individual strengths and expressions of leadership and the simple holding of between relationships and task, and we need both. I love that it's underpinned by such a rigorous combination of adult development theory and human psychology and human needs theory and spiral dynamics, and there's so much underneath it.
It was an educative piece throughout the organisation, and the board, like every governing board, they all come together from a variety of different worlds, and for them to be able to be exposed to the leadership circle as well, I think gave them a particular understanding, and again, some of the language and meaning that was aligned very closely to our values. The fact it was so visual, with ease to use the tool and to be able to communicate the findings, and that we were supported by very skilled people, well trained with the tool as well. That was part of our reason for selection and part of our confidence and trust. When I watched the way we managed all of the bushfires and the recovery, we went into COVID, we set up a COVID hospital, we set up vaccination clinics, we set up testing clinics, we changed the services we provided, we swapped out to virtual services, we changed everything. And in that time, we went from what I observed people with superhuman effort after prolonged fatigue, we saw burnout. And as a CEO, that was extremely hard. At the time, you think you don't have a minute to pause was the time that we really needed to. So to be able to have our culture and leadership program run alongside us and to catch us, if you like, when we were falling was extremely important. And I continue to look back, that was the key, most important decision I made during that period of time. And so being able to attract and retain people into our organisation is really critical. And Tanya and I hold a very strong belief that creating the right value system and creating a culture where people can be at their best is critical to attracting and retaining that workforce.
And so one of the challenges for the, design and development of the leadership and culture program over that 3-year period was everything had to be virtual. But all of our coaching, all of our workshops, all of our training and development, all of the components of the work, with one or two little exceptions, really, most of it was done online. And so incredibly challenging then to say, if what we're focused on here is relationships, compassion, kindness, listening deeply, noticing for the subtle, showing up and being able to talk about things that are a bit difficult, make us feel vulnerable. What it required of us in the pursuit of leadership and development during that time was to stay really focused on being present, removing distractions, some of those things that it's easier to control for in the face-to-face environment, and then online, the potential is for people to become distracted and fracture off, even though they're physically present on a screen.
How are we going to find time to do the investment? That it's the external environment that needs to make things right. It's not us to make things right. So I think there was a little bit of that on the very, very early stages, but I could say very confidently it was a very easy sell. I feel like we got over that really quickly. And new people coming into the organisation, like partway through the journey, they were like, oh my goodness, is it always like that here? And what they were meaning is that, we have an opportunity to be vulnerable, be our real selves, talk the truth, lean into really hard stuff. The culture and leadership program, if we had not had that in place during the last 4 years, I think I would have seen a much more serious impact on our team. I think I would have lost more members of my team, and that would have had an overall impact on our performance, without a doubt, and our capacity to adapt and adopt to our external environment. So we, throughout this whole period, we have retained a very high performance rating with the department for this state. we constantly lean in and assist metropolitan services and have made a huge difference in that, which is now well recognised. So not only did we look after ourselves, we've looked after others. We did more COVID testing than any other local health network, and we had our community 80% vaccinated first beyond any other local health network. We have got a reputation for delivering. We have got a reputation of having a good culture, which is fantastic to hear back. I hear a lot people saying there's something going on in BHF, we don't know what it is, but it looks really good and everybody wants to work there. Even the Minister for Health says to me, everyone wants to work in BHF. But, we just had accreditation where we had 14 assessors come and review Barossa Hills Fleurieu over 5 days. And the feedback that we got from that accreditation around the dedication of our staff to their communities, about seeing our values in action, and about seeing our investment in culture and leadership. I couldn't have crafted a better response than they fed back to us at the end of their survey week. So I'll never know what would have happened if we didn't invest in this. And the support that we did with the program was on the run support, on the field support. So when things got really difficult, I had Tanya on the end of the phone, then with the individual coaching, then with the individual programs that we were developing and the middle management support that we were doing, together with our first mental health first aid work. And if we didn't have the capacity through this program to hear what was going on, to know how people were feeling, to be able to receive ideas and information about how to support people better, if we weren't open to that and didn't have a mechanism, I would doubt that we would have retained all of our leaders as we have done very well in, and that we would continue to be performing and seen as being performing so well.
Look, in retrospect, it sounds like a very cohesive strategy, but in reality, it was a very action learning focused approach to evolving the leadership and culture program over 3 years. And so we basically planned in six monthly chunks. We had an idea to start with a collective leadership assessment and some, individual focused leadership circle profiles and coaching, and that would open up the conversations that I guess revealed what was needed next. Then once we had the initial collective leadership assessment and the executive and then the senior managers, we initially started with some cross-divisional, cross-departmental senior management groups and did some group coaching in mixed groups. And after the first 6 months, it was like, now, actually, that was great, getting to know each other, but we actually really need to hit the rubber on the road here with our own teams, so that the development's not happening out there, but it's actually we're held accountable on day-to-day in our teams that we rub shoulders with most of the time. And running parallel to this has been a long-standing program called Growing Leaders, which Barossa Hills Fleurieu not only continued to invest in, but ramped up during this period to have a tailored Barossa Hills Fleurieu Emerging Leaders program, which we were able to then also infuse with the concepts of the leadership circle and used it in light touch ways with just a self-assessment, not a 360. And so that meant that there was then language in the emerging leader, senior leader and executive, and also in the board, where there was consistent language in a vertical way right through the organisation. So the thing that didn't change throughout was Rebecca's unwavering commitment to investing time and energy of herself, her leaders and multi-levels of the organisation to respond when it was clear that COVID impact was significant on wellbeing, and not just before it was too late, but proactively. So I think there's some other key pillars like deliberately developmental organisations, like community to change. Some of these concepts and tools that have been developed by incredibly clever people that really resonate and leverage well off the leadership circle as a starting point to dig deeper into understanding what's driving our behaviour. Is that behaviour helping or harming?
For me, apart from creating an environment for people to be at their best, for me, I think deep down underneath that, I actually wanted to prove a point. And I think I continue to want to prove this point. And that is if we invest in our own culture and leadership and our own well-being and the well-being of our staff, the ripple effect through our organisation makes an absolute difference to people who are serving our consumers and the people who are looking after our patients in emergency departments, looking after people in aged care or people at home. With the different components of the program, we are seeing evidence coming out of those, such as the TLC, the two reports that we did. We're beginning to have measures now that are demonstrating our success. When a team gets into trouble, and of course they will, we know how to respond. We've got some ideas to go in and tailor something to work with a particular team, which is magnificent. One of my surprises is for me as a leader, it's become more comfortable for me to talk about this stuff. We did this magnificent away day. We walked away with 3 things, right? We're very highly competitive. But we didn't want to compete anymore. We didn't want to compete with each other. We want to compete with other local health networks. So we wanted to become connected, and we wanted to focus on our connection with each other, which we built over that time, and our connection to family, our connection to community. So that was really a beautiful piece. And then the second thing is this concept of busyness. And, that concept of busyness actually gets in our way, and we're able to have those conversations now. So we decided we're going to part with busyness and we're going to invest in balance. And the third part of that is the concept of perfectionism and being perfect. We decided we're going to move away from being perfect and we're going to move into excellence and focusing on being the best that we can be. So being able to take our whole leadership journey and all of it, our leadership program and all of its parts, and culminate that in an away day, and that we can so comfortably say, well, this is who we are, but this is what we want to move away from. And by the way, we're going to be really deliberate about it. And by the way, we're going to talk to our teams about it and talk to the organisation about it, was just mind-blowing. And then the final surprise is how we have appreciated First Nations wisdom and culture and the practices that we have adapted and adopted. And I'll speak of yarning circles as an example, how we've realised the importance of that ancient knowledge and wisdom in an environment where we're kind of expected to be really businesslike and really transactional, and the importance of this and appreciating First Nations culture has also made us a better organisation, and particularly as we're serving First Nations people.
Just for a bit of background on that before I talk about the Indigenous cultural pieces, what we did in the away days was present the 2019 data side by side with the 2022 data. And what really stood out was massive shift in the positive direction, and that there was some, a familiar friend still hanging around in these issues of perfectionism and, that driving focus and that sense of that competitive pieces. So these pieces that were there in 2019 that were part of the story of burnout and fatigue and imbalance for people were still present, even though the overall picture was stronger and more creative overall, that these 3 legacy pieces still featured. And so we were able to take a deep dive into what would it take, not just to talk it, but to really walk it, and noticing that comes up in us individually, but also in the collective dynamic. And as we were doing that, we did an exercise where we were looking at, where we've come from, say 2019, when the organisation was formed, to now, today, it was, December 2022. And then what about if we continue this trajectory of how well the leadership and culture work has strengthened the balance, resilience, excellence of the organisation, what might be possible in the year 3000, what might be possible if we were to continue the trajectory, and that is actually ancient wisdom, this long-term thinking about not thinking about time as a straight line, but about cycles, and have some beautiful Indigenous leaders in the organisation, and a couple who were present, and this deepening of the conversation that says, actually, this is about remembering the power of sitting in a circle, being equal, listening, slowing down, focusing on life and life cycles and what's important intergenerationally, and taking that long view.
We can hold difficult conversations and still retain the relationships, the trust and the respect. That's, to me, one of the best signs of knowing that the program has been successful.
Barossa Hills Fleurieu, when it was established, developed 5 values: trust, respect, integrity, collaboration and kindness. They wanted all staff in the network to role model every day, to provide the best possible care to our communities. But what do they look like as behaviours when things are getting tough? I think that bit's incredibly powerful. And also the pre and post testing circles themselves speak volumes. Honestly cried when I first saw the results, because I know how tough the 3 years was for the team, and to see such incredible positive movement, particularly in how they're perceived by the board and by their direct reports. Still pretty harsh on the way they perceive themselves, but to see significant shifts, and still significant shifts in executive, but by and large, blow it out of the park improvements in the exec and direct report space, and a little bit more conservative recognition of their own progress. It's mind-blowing given those challenges of the constraint, the time of bushfires, COVID, change of government, massive pressure, resource constraint, budget pressures, that as a network BHF continue to outperform, achieve incredible performance and support and nourish their people. Massive shifts from 2019 to 2022. So if we look at what of the Leadership Circle collective leadership assessment profile of the executive team in 2019, it was majority creative, but the sort of things that stood out as areas across all 3. I think one of the executives at the time, I remember him saying, it's like doing an audit. If you do an audit 3 times and you get the same results, it's pretty validating. And so the 3 audits being the board's perspective, the executive's perspective on themselves, and the direct reports perspectives all said similar things, which were, we're worried about the sustainability of the productivity here. We're worried about balance. It feels like a really strong push to be driven, and a little bit too pleasing, a little bit too compliant, but generally this sort of sense of the unsustainable, unrelenting pace, and coupled with perfectionism and excellence, means that it's never good enough, never enough time, and really tough to have as a prevailing centre of gravity as a leadership group in such an unrelenting environment and the challenges. And so we did a lot of the work that we did focused on what is this thing of balance and unsustainable productivity, and what is this thing about being really driven and busy, and what is this thing about perfectionism and how that shows up in unhealthy ways that mean that we're creating more busy work and reworking things that are probably good enough. And so the pre-results show that, and then the post-results, both, and again, all 3 perspectives show that while balance and driven and sustainable productivity are still all there in the top, that they're not in they're not significant in terms of being more than 20% different. The gap has closed significantly between the desired culture and what people are saying they currently experience in the collective leadership. Balance is still there from the executive, from the direct reports and from the board in 2022. It is the gap has closed. And again, meaning that there's better alignment between what we believe is realistic and appropriate and desired and what people are experiencing of the collective leadership. So some pretty impressive shifts, but the one that blew me away the most was the shift in the perception by direct reports. Their experience of the collective leadership of the executive team went from looking like a bullseye on the leadership circle profile, or the collective leadership assessment rather, to looking much more like a sunrise. Pretty significant shifts and similar shape shift for the board, the degree of confidence from the board across all domains of leadership in its creative expression, off the charts.
I remember the day that I got the results coming through in an email from Tanya, and I saw the title of the result and I was hesitant to open them because we'd been through, several years of a very tough environment. I opened it and was very emotional and so pleased because, as we all know, indicators of culture and indicators of leadership are hard to achieve at an organisational level. And for us to be able to repeat this exercise within the interval period, not only in a turbulent environment, but with many things still being the same, like a lot of still the same staff and a lot of still the same board members, not everyone. But to me, it was incredibly validating. And to see on our creative sides, to be seeing so much more of an improvement and us beginning to look like almost a perfect mushroom was fantastic.
And what we've decided to do is to go back out to the executive in our true to form, that this is actually a co-designed evolution about where they're feeling the pressure is and where they think the investment and energy and focus needs to be. There's a piece that we have done using story and the power of story on noticing what we call the whiff of the dragon, when we're starting to stray from the desired culture and we're starting to hear the rumble, smell the burnt grass and kind of see that there's something not quite okay with the village, and that might be a dragon lurking. And we've spent a fair bit of time sort of digging into what are those legacy stories that are shaping the things that resurface, martyrdom, what it is that shapes working beyond our own capacities to a level of ill health. Some of those things that, I guess, the downside of being so purpose-driven in as health professionals, and that feature in the unsustainable productivity and the lack of balance, or the not sufficiently desired levels of balance in the results, and continue to work at multiple levels of the organisation, mostly in the proactive space, but also in that capacity for intervention where there are teams that have got themselves into patterns that aren't helpful, to be able to turn things back around as well. I have no doubt that BHF will continue to invest in growing their leaders in ways that are emergent and adaptive to whatever next crazy thing comes their way that challenges them.
From my perspective, this is just the beginning. And the idea of developing this as we go with everybody's input, but we're looking forward to continuing under Tanya's guidance. It's at the time that you think you don't have a moment to pause that you really need to, would be my first key takeaway. The second key takeaway would be to the power of being oneself without those normal defensive mechanisms that we have, and the ability to do that as a leadership group has moved mountains for us. It's been really critical. And I think the third takeaway is It is a real gift when you have a team that become comfortable with the uncomfortable.
What I have witnessed is the letting go of needing to be in control and having it right and being all put together, and actually leaning into the uncomfortable and the vulnerabilities. And what that means as a leadership group is that they're able to greet each other with compassion and lean into the collective problem solving in ways they weren't able to do initially.
I think that when I observe things among my team happen that's really hard and highly disruptive, and where we see reactions come, is that I watch how quickly people settle again, support one another. I love the mindset shift that I see, and it speaks to what Tanya said earlier about internal environment versus external and what can you control. This concept of flipping things, it's about what we do have and how do we capitalize on that. Let's flip that. And that again is really powerful, being able to work and utilize what you have, because so often we don't know the power we do have and the influence that we do have.